Please welcome to the stage Raffi Krikorian of Emerson Collective and Teresa Hutson of Microsoft.
Hi. So we're here to talk about all the things at the intersection of technology and social impact.
All the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff. So you have this really interesting history of being an engineer at Twitter and at Uber, and now you're in the space of thinking really deeply and at the DNC, and so thinking really deeply about that intersection. What worries you the most right now?
The thing that really worries me the most is that I feel like we all need to be part of this conversation on how technology is sort of becoming part of our lives.
Yeah.
I talk to so many people every day about this AI thing is so new, and I worry about it. I'm like, it's not new. It's been around for a while.
Right.
You're talking about one particular thing. But the thing that worries me is that people feel like it's inevitable, like it's just coming and being thrust upon them. I'm like, no, you all have a voice. Like you all have an opinion. And what worries me is how do we get them all engaged in this bigger conversation?
Do you have ideas? Because that's a question I think about all the time at Microsoft. How do you get the input from all the people who are using your technology in ways that you anticipate and then also don't necessarily anticipate, which I imagine coming from a social media platform, that was part of your history as well.
I used to joke when I was at the DNC and I'd speak in front of Democratic meetings, I'd actually literally have to apologize. That was like the first thing I did. I'm just like, I'm sorry, I used to work at Twitter. These days I can say I worked at Twitter, I don't work at X, so maybe it's a better thing. But I really think it starts with education. I think it's upon people like Microsoft, people like me, to figure out how to actually communicate to people the nuances of all this technology that they're using. I like to say a lot that my mother-in-law, who I love dearly, amazing woman, she understands why we have speed limits on highways. She understands if you go too fast, there's problems. She understands guardrails. All that makes sense to her. If I ask her about the Ring doorbell or the video doorbell she just installed in her house, she doesn't understand all the nuances.
Right.
And I think that's a failing, actually, upon all of us. So we haven't done a good job understanding and communicating pros and cons, how we should really think about this. Is a cloud-based video doorbell what you really want? What are the implications behind all that? How should you think about it? The answer might be still yes, but you need to actually understand you're participating in this bigger thing.
Yeah, and you don't really know what the trade-offs are. As I, basically, as soon as ChatGPT kind of burst onto the scene and we were, thinking about this biggest election in kind of the history of the world, which is actually true. Mm-hmm. Every time India votes, you probably know this from your history in politics, but every time India votes, it's the biggest public event in history every single time. And we had elections around the world. And everybody I talked to was really, really worried about deep fakes in elections. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about that and mitigating against that, and in our safety architecture, in our content provenance, in our rules of engagement on our platforms. But I think the biggest opportunity is what you're talking about, which is education. And I don't know what your point of view is on this, but in my view, actually, so far we haven't seen deepfakes be so disruptive. My point of view on that is it's largely because they happen publicly.
Sure.
And that what you're talking about is kind of more concerning to me. It's those private trade-offs where a deep fake is being used to defraud your mother-in-law.
100%.
And I don't know, is that sort of, from where you sit, does that resonate? How do you think about that?
On that particular point, I actually think that we're on the precipice of all our biometric identification just sort of failing. I now completely failing in the sense that, I now talk to my wife, and I actually have a code word of just if you ever hear me call you and ask for something, you should ask for what the code word is, because we can no longer trust my voice print when I come online.
Yeah.
My mother shouldn't trust if she gets a video message from me that's seemingly suspicious.
I've been kidnapped. I said the same thing to my mom, by the way.
Yeah, so I think it's upon all of us to really understand this world that we're sort of living in. But zooming out for a second on the elections, I think you're right that we haven't seen this in the US, but half the world went through some kind of democratic process, or maybe half the world, once we add the US in a few weeks, is going under some democratic process this year. And we haven't seen deepfakes in the US be a big deal, although there was an issue with President Biden's voice being used in New Hampshire primary. So there are still examples showing up, Taylor Swift's fake endorsement of Donald Trump, that kind of thing. But other countries were kind of wild. Like
Yeah.
Indonesia was effectively a Disneyland of deepfakes.
Yeah,
Like they
yeah.
had a dead former leader endorsing a candidate.
true.
Like
It was a son though, right?
yeah, I mean, but still. I mean,
no,
like
it's creepy.
And in India, like they literally had people of celebrities doing endorsements of candidates that they literally didn't record
Yeah,
online. So other countries are actually seeing really big implications of what it looks like. We seem to be lucky. We seem to have dodged it this time.
So far. I think we do have to stay vigilant.
We have 5
we'll-
weeks.
Yeah, and I think that it will be that sort of 48 hours before and 48 hours
It's a nice
after.
drop, exactly.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I guess I probably should have put a finer point on it, which is we've seen deepfakes everywhere. I think as we've looked at it, we've only thought that one potentially influenced the outcome of the election, which, you know, I think we will continue to see people use the AI technology because, you know, a candidate could send his messages or her messages around the world in a different language,
Exactly.
right? So it could be a good tool.
There are good reasons.
But we have to mitigate, and even with the voice technology that could be used to defraud your mother or your mother-in-law or my mom, pretending I've been kidnapped and she'll send all of her money through Facebook. It's terrible. I have to talk to her about it all the time. There are cases where, you know, we've developed technology that can be used for somebody who loses their voice to ALS. And they can continue to communicate in their own voice through technology once they've lost the ability physically. So how do you think about that balance where there is the sort of the good and the bad?
Yeah, I mean, like these dual use
Yeah,
situations,
yeah,
right? Like, I
exactly.
mean, like all the companies are sort of doing this, not just Microsoft in
right.
some way. I mean, I think one, we need to align on what our values really are. Like, and I think that that's actually been one of the things that we've been missing.
Yeah.
Like we've been in this race to develop interesting technology. Look, I love interesting technology. I buy
You're
every.
an engineer,
I'm an engineer. I buy every gadget that comes out. But we
Do
need
you have
to,
a Ring camera?
I don't actually have a Ring camera. I do have a video camera, but it's all locally stored. I
Interesting.
don't sort of
Okay,
send it up to the
okay.
cloud.
Got it.
Happy to tell anyone in the audience how I pull it
Yeah.
off. But I think that we need to have a conversation of what we actually believe to be the right thing for us as Americans, for us global citizens, and then realign our technological view toward that. You know, going back to elections again, like I think there are some simple things that we could be doing that I think we actually all agree on. So Ireland, one of their candidates was attacked by synthetic, non-consensual sexual imagery.
Yeah.
That should just be banned.
That should be
like
banned.
we should just
Yeah,
ban that
yeah.
across the world, and like that seems like no one would actually argue with that. So
Yeah.
I think we get stuck in these conversations of like the big right solution, but there are like some obvious small things we should just start doing.
I really, really agree. And I think it is important to talk about the things we agree on because otherwise you end up in these conversations. Like,
Correct.
the values conversations are hard in a
Correct.
political environment where we are now. I do worry a little bit because it's so hard to get legislation passed, right, to address some of these things. I mean, I think we should agree that this technology shouldn't be used to defraud people.
Yep.
It shouldn't be used to harm children. It shouldn't be used to, you know, create synthetic non-consensual sexual imagery, which is like layers of terrible there.
It's horrible.
And you know, the impact, especially on women in public life,
Horrible.
is really, really terrible. I mean, it's something like, I don't know, 82% of parliamentarians and women serving in public office have faced online harassment, and 1 in 6 women globally leave in the middle of their first term because they're facing this stuff. So, but how do you think we have that conversation? Because it always turns into this like, but free speech, or, you know, it's so easy to distract with these red herrings.
Yeah.
Do we really think that that should be protected speech? I don't think so. I think we agree that fraud is not. So do you have ideas for how to do that?
I mean, I do think it starts with grassroots conversations,
Yeah.
honestly. Like, I think it starts from the bottom, not from the top. And so, like, a lot of what I think about these days is, like, how do we set up the right three-legged stool for these conversations? Like, we have tech companies who are building this amazing technology, dual-use technology that goes into the world. We have government regulators who are, I think well-meaning, but caught in a bunch of political crossfire that makes it hard for them to do their job. But then there's the rest of us. And
Right.
we don't spend enough time on the rest of us.
Right.
Like, we need to figure out, what does a next generation AI literacy and AI education mean? Not just for my kids. Like, we need to completely reform home economics. We need to do all that
Yeah.
stuff to teach our kids, but also for the rest of us. And I think, like, there are opportunities to do that. Like, whether it is, you know, One of my favorite examples, in 2018, Finland had a webinar to try to teach their 1% of their population something about AI. That was their goal.
Okay.
They got to 10%.
Oh, wow.
10% of the Finnish population. Now, Finland is more of a club than a country, but you
yeah,
know.
No, it's true. I went there to try and figure out like how do you engage like media literacy throughout, and they've embedded it in their entire education system.
But it's
right?
kind of amazing,
It's
right?
amazing.
So like, it's something for us to aspire towards,
Yeah.
that we can try to figure out. And like, there are opportunities. Look, like The Social Dilemma, which showed up in Sundance and showed up in Netflix, educated us all to the dangers of social media. Like, we need, like, what's the popular media, popular message that someone should be doing the TikTok channel, maybe Concordia should be doing a TikTok channel specifically on the concerns around data privacy, AI, deepfakes, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, because we think a lot about, like, it turns out Microsoft is not the best person to educate the public, right? We're just not. Like, many people, like, everybody knows Microsoft. Not everybody knows what Microsoft really does. People, like, we don't have a ton of consumer products, actually. Most of what we sell is to the enterprise. So we've thought about, do you try and embed some of just, whether it's civics awareness, AI literacy into corporate training? I don't know. But I think even figuring out how to get that information, because we have this problem of who are the trusted speakers.
Correct.
So does that come up for you in the work you do now?
Yeah, I mean, like, we talk about this all the time. Like, in like the political world, you talk about like who is a trusted messenger to send the right information on. Where can you register to vote? Where's your polling place, and things like that. So we do need to find the right trusted people in the community. And I do think it's like people like your teacher in your elementary school, your pastor, the PTA president, the football coach, or just the influencer that happens to be in your neighborhood. I mean, these are
It's the local people.
It's the local people. It's like, these aren't common messages we would hear from them, but if we heard from them, you would listen for a second. We just need to figure out what those levers look like. I'm not saying this is easy by any means, but I think this is literally might be one of the most important things we have to go do.
I agree, and figuring out how to have that sort of national conversation. I will say the one thing it's sort of strange, but I feel a little bit comforted when something like the Biden robocall happened, or the fake Taylor Swift endorsement, because it does lead to a public conversation. The press, the headlines, they do lead to that public conversation. Again, I worry a lot more about those sort of one-to-one private interactions, that where there isn't, whether it is your Ring doorbell, or it's the, what do you do when somebody sends you a video purporting to be of you in a compromised position and says, I need you to give me money, or I'm going to put this out in the world. Like, those things, I think we need to have more of those conversations. And I don't know if it's like, I've thought a lot about, like, do you try to go to the local news to get the local news to cover it, right? There's a cat in the tree and you should watch out for technology. I don't know. I'm downplaying local news because I actually think it's a super, super important, trusted speaker. But, like, it is where people look for consumer protections, and so I keep trying to figure this out. So if you figure it out,
I mean, there's no.
You can do a TikTok channel.
I would love that. I would actually love
let's
that. I mean, there's no silver bullet. Is really the problem. Like, there was a movie recently called Thelma. You should all watch it, about a woman, about a grandmother whose grandson called her asking for money, and she sends $10,000, and then goes on a revenge trail to find the person who actually did it to her. It's a wonderful movie. It was a Sundance last year. Totally recommend it. So I think we need more of those kind of things, just to like elevate it in our minds. But conversation is only one part. Like, we do need our legislators, our elected, to actually do something. Like, they haven't made progress. COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, is getting close, but by no means done. So we need to think about that. There's been no federal data privacy legislation ever. And we need to talk about that. It's kind of embarrassing that the Europeans can kind of get their acts together, but we can't really think about it. And then we need to figure out the role of the tech companies to build the responsible technology, because you guys actually hold most of the keys. Like, you're the fingers on the keyboard.
We do.
You've done so many amazing things. We need to make sure that we're also doing this in the way that's beneficial to all of us.
Well, and I think the other part of that conversation is having the conversation after a product's been deployed. Like, it's like once you sort of see, oh, whoa, that had an impact we didn't anticipate it having. And finding ways to kind of have that ongoing conversation. So maybe I'll end on like because I think you have to be a little bit of an optimist to do this work.
Correct.
When you look about, you said you have 2 kids. When you think about your kids, do you think they'll be better at this inherently?
I do think they'll be better at us inherently, but I also think that they are potentially growing up in a world that I find depressing. And so like we need to like figure out both how to give them the world that we want them to be in, but I do think they're just more digitally native than the rest of us. So like I'm not willing to wait for a generation to be in charge, so we need to do something now, and then they'll also give us the future.
Yeah, because I'm just watching, I have a 16 and 18-year-old daughters, and I'm just watching their choices, their social media choices, and they're quite different.
Yeah.
So it does make me a little optimistic, and the work keeps me busy every day, as I'm
Exactly
sure
right,
it keeps
exactly
me
right.
busy. Well, thank you. This has been such
has
a
been a
great
pleasure.
conversation. We could keep going for a while, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.